writer for The New Yorker investigates the mysterious death of a girl that he once hooked up with after her family, who thought they were in a very serious relationship, invites him to the funeral. Most folks are going to recognize B.J. Novak, who wrote, starred in, and directed Vengeance, which, by the way, this is his first film, from his character of Ryan Howard from The Office. Now, in Vengeance, he plays a character who, much like his Office character, is just easy to hate. In the opening scene, we get to hear an extended conversation with him and his friend John Mayer, who is playing himself, as they talk about all the girls that they've hooked up with and how they have their names stored in their phones. And they say 100%, about 100% too many times. I assume all of this was intentional to make us really not sympathize with either of these guys. But as the movie goes along, I realized that that was actually a smart choice, because a character who starts off so deep in a moral hole with the audience has a much higher redemption ladder to climb over the course of the movie. Now, that's not to say that I ended up approving of all of the things that the character did. There is a lot of condescension in the writing, and Novak's character Ben as well. And the story is very much just a fish out of water story. You know, when the high class, full of himself, wannabe writer from New York City travels to the deep rural part of Texas that's at least 5 hours from any city that you've ever heard of. Now, Ben doesn't want to be in Texas surrounded by the family of a dead girl he barely knows, while he tries not to spoil their perfect image of her. The family includes a couple of brothers, a couple of sisters, and a mom and a grandma, and I loved every single one of these characters. Sure, they don't speak high class or dress high class and don't know what the New Yorker magazine is, but they all have these big hearts, and what they say is interesting and it means something. If you've ever watched a movie like this, you pretty much know how Ben is going to change over the course of the movie, but watching his journey is part of the fun. But on top of this, there is a deep mystery at the core of the story. Ben decides to make a podcast about this girl, and he is determined to find out how she died. He suspects there may be more to it than the story the only two cops in town are telling. And speaking of cops, there is a surprisingly funny scene where Ben is trying to find out who has jurisdiction over the case of this dead girl. And there's actually quite a bit of humor in Vengeance overall. Now, it's not in-your-face humor, it's more subtle and dry, but I found it to be probably the most enjoyable part of the movie. And the podcast angle works, but at the same time, I'm sick of every TV show and movie revolving around a podcast. And that's coming from a guy who has a podcast. Vengeance surprised me. I was never really a fan of Novak's character on The Office, so I kind of prejudged this movie a little bit. I was kind of right in doing so, as his character here reminds me a lot of his Office character. Some of the dialogue seems a little pretentious, and not all of it works, but there is more good than bad here, and the fact that every character other than Ben is lovely and interesting more than makes up for the way I feel about him. B.J. Novak is a good writer, even if I didn't love the direction that this ended up going, and he's a good director. This movie does not feel like a first movie for a director. I do think maybe I would have enjoyed it just a little bit more with someone else in the lead, but don't let that scare you away. It's only around 90 minutes long, and it's well worth watching just for the characters. The surprisingly good mystery is just icing on the cake. Being forced to speak at a funeral. Being told you look like one of them guys from Schindler's List. Recording a podcast at an oil field. Trying to fit in. Visiting a stranger's memorial.